My name is John Perkins. I'm the owner of Juniper Restaurant, which is a southern restaurant in the Central West End in St. Louis, Missouri. And I do what I do, I guess, because I love to feed people. I love to give them a hospitable experience. I like to make them feel welcome. I love the energy of a restaurant. I like it more when it's busy, but yeah, that's why. My beginning in food is a little bit unconventional for most people. Instead of going to culinary school, I started doing an underground restaurant almost 8 years ago. And what an underground restaurant is and was, in my case, was a secret dinner party where I would invite people basically a couple weeks in advance to come to a dinner, 5-course dinner. It would be a secret location to be revealed usually by email, maybe an hour or two ahead of time. Folks would show up and we'd put on a meal paired with wine. And I did that for about 3 years, and I really learned how to cook by doing that. Learned a lot of lessons, and then that grew into a bit of a catering business, which ultimately ended up in the restaurant that I own now, which is Juniper. As I said, a bit unconventional. Certainly wasn't even what I expected when I started, but I'm happy where I'm at, and I'm glad that we've grown to the point that we have. It's a pretty amazing story, actually. Being an entrepreneur is more guts than glory, I think. And I think the reality is that it's a fairly lonely position at times. I don't know that I would do it any other way, and maybe it is because I'm a glutton for punishment, I don't know. But, you know, I think there's a lot to do with trusting yourself and making decisions and stepping out in areas and in ways that can be daunting and frightening, I think, probably to most folks. And frankly, if I was sane, I'd probably think they were too frightening to do to myself, but I've just done them. And I don't know that there's one kind of entrepreneur, like there's a single type, but in my case, I did things because it just seemed the most natural thing to do next. And sometimes it was a matter of necessity, and sometimes it was a matter of imagination, and sometimes it was a matter of both. But I think behind it all is an intense drive to do something productive and to contribute, and that probably is universal. The other motivations that enter into it, you know, those are all, this can be very particular based on the person, but I think in my case, like I just have this like really just crazy drive to do what I do, and sometimes I don't even understand it, but it's there, and it pushes me forward. Eating together is a really interesting thing. When I started doing the underground restaurant, it was really kind of a matter, at least at the beginning, of almost circumstance. We had long tables, everybody ate at the same table, and you'd have all these strangers who would sit together, and I realized something, again, almost by accident, but it was just the power of eating together with people and so the shared experience of food. And that thing, whatever it is, whether it's spiritual or relational or emotional, that happens when you dine together is a very powerful social force. And so when I opened the restaurant, another thing kind of entered into that picture, and that was that for the most part the people who come to my restaurant are fairly well off, and you know, we're not a crazy expensive restaurant, but we're not cheap either, and it takes a certain amount of money to come and eat at a place like mine. So there's a whole group of people that don't necessarily have the access to my restaurant because of their own financial situation. And then in a more broader sense, a lot of people don't have access to the kind of food quality that we have access to at the restaurant. And so it's prompted a lot of questions about what it means to be engaged in food in a way that's really equitable and just for people at large, for the broader community. And so, you know, I've really had to wrestle with, like, how do I begin to address, just as a restaurant owner and somebody who cares about my community and my city, how do I begin to address the lack of access that some people have to good food, to healthy food, to properly raised food, to that sort of thing. A lot of people don't necessarily care about whether or not their tomato is organic, but at the same time, having access to a tomato that, you know, is filled with the right kind of nutrients and not just sprayed with pesticides and hasn't been sitting in a warehouse for 6 months or what have you, is a rarity in certain parts of our community. And so that's always struck me as something I've wanted to address, and I haven't answered the question. It's just something that takes up to be honest, a good portion of my imagination in my mind, and have conversations with people when I can about what it looks like to have food to be more accessible, to create a more, I don't know, just dining environment, to be able to offer food to people that is affordable, that's healthy, that's well made. And then to work backwards, really not just from the tomato, but work backwards from the prepared food back to the importance of where their food comes from. Because I think sometimes we start at the beginning like, hey, everybody just eat organic, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think. I think it starts more with, oh my gosh, this is an amazing dish. This is so great. I want to eat this. Then we start working back to the provenance of where these things come from. So, you know, I think food justice is one of those things that we haven't really started diving into in a large way in the food community, but I'm beginning to hear groups across the country start to talk about it, especially in an urban context. So I'm excited to see where that goes, and also looking forward to ways that I can contribute here in St. Louis. A perfect day for me, I have a large family, I have 5 kids and a wife, and I think a perfect day for me would probably involve a great combination of what I do for a living and what I do as a father and as a husband. And so it probably involves some kind of spending time with my family during the day, whether it was going to the zoo, which we have a great zoo here in St. Louis, or just you know, generally spending time with them, and then going to the restaurant, being able to see a full restaurant, feel the energy and the excitement of a place like that. Know that we're doing our job well, knowing that people are leaving happy and satisfied, and then coming home again to my family. I think that sort of fulfills both of those categories of my life, the home life, which is very unique and different, and the life that I have at work. So I think if you're an entrepreneur, failure isn't automatic. I mean, it's going to happen. In fact, I think more than likely it's your response to failure that probably defines how successful you end up becoming. And despite the fact that I still exist and I'm still working in a restaurant, I mean, the amount of times that I've failed, probably too numerous to count. And so, you know, there have been times when I have encountered this failure, whether it's a financial decision or whether it was just a general decision about business or maybe a bad hire or what have you. And the weight of it seems so all-encompassing, and so it weighs you down so much. But I've also been able to remove myself at times, large part because of, you know, being able to talk to my wife and get a little perspective on these sorts of things. But to pull back and look at the bigger picture and see all these different areas that, you know, I think sometimes you get so focused on the failure that you forget about the 8 out of other 10 things that are going well for you and that bode well for you and that speak well for you and that give you hope and that are cause for continuing, you know, your life's work. And so I think, you know, when we face failure, I think sometimes the tendency is to blow it much larger than it is. I think that's one problem that we have. I think the other thing is that it's just very easy to quit. And I think the one thing that probably distinguishes successful entrepreneurs from those that aren't successful is that kind of dogged determination that no matter what happens, you're going to do this. You're going to do it, and nothing's going to stop you, even if it's something fairly profound, some sort of profound failure. And you may continue to do it and be successful at it, may be completely different because of that failure, but your dogged determination is going to make you push through it and not just throw in the towel. I think that's certainly been the case in my situation over the last few years, and my guess is probably true for a lot of folks. Yeah, so I think, you know, for a restaurant, at least in my case, especially for a younger generation of restaurateurs, it's so vital to always be examining what you're doing and trying to keep it fresh. I mean, I think, you know, what I did when I started was the underground restaurant changed every month, so every menu was different, and it built in me at least a kind of restless creativity, and maybe it was already there to begin with, I don't know, but I think in the situation now that I have, which is a stationary restaurant, there is such importance for me and such a need for me to constantly be reevaluating what we do. Is it successful? Do we need new ideas? Do we need fresh ideas? The answer is always yes. So what are those ideas? What can we do to bring more people in? And then the things that we keep doing, how do we make those better? So innovation in my context means, it can mean menu items, it can mean events, it can mean not necessarily a kind of a holistic rebrand, but like how do we begin to shift and adapt to the market forces? It'd be very easy to say this is the kind of restaurant I want to do, and then 2 years later you realize that that restaurant that you wanted to do just doesn't work, and so you have to adapt. And that's true in business at large. It's definitely true in the restaurant world, and so you kind of always have to be aware of what's going on around you and then be willing to adapt, but you have to have the imagination to be able to adapt too, and be humble enough to adapt, because part of that is admitting that what you're currently doing maybe isn't working the way you need it to. So, innovation takes shape in a lot of different ways, from a broad kind of vision for the restaurant to the particulars of a menu item, and so we're always engaged with it. I am certainly as an owner of a restaurant, but challenge that to my employees, the guys that run my bar, the guys that run my kitchen. We're sort of, it's a defining characteristic of what we do. Yeah, I think the first thing I do with an entrepreneur, a newly minted entrepreneur, is I tell him how sorry I am for him. I hold him for a little bit, or her, and I give them my condolences. I joke, but as I said earlier, it's a lonely business, it's a lonely enterprise, and it's a tough one too. And you have to be tough, you have to be strong, and so we read all these success stories all the time because that's what we want to read, that's what people want to publish, but the reality is that 90% of everybody else gets into this because we have a dream or we have a vision and we want to pursue it. And the job of that, the daily work-a-day kind of stuff that really makes up the life of an entrepreneur, is kind of a grueling thing, and it's taxing. And so I think probably more than anything, I would want to dispel the myth that that life is just going to be happy if you're an entrepreneur, because it isn't. It's going to be filled with struggle, and a really unique kind of struggle. And so it takes a real serious degree of perseverance to push through those tough times, but it's absolutely worth it in the long run. And there's so much pride and I think fulfillment that comes in the end, but it's not an easy road to hoe, that's for sure. So as far as local food goes, at our restaurant we certainly buy local as much as we can, which I think is an approach that you find in a lot of places there. Some folks like to say they buy all local, but the reality is that pretty much nobody does anymore. I mean, it's virtually impossible. We use lemons, we use limes, we use oranges. Those things aren't grown locally. So there's a class of produce and things that we get that aren't grown locally necessarily, but there's great value in buying locally. One, it stimulates the economy. I mean, there are a lot of people that live and work and their life's work is in farming. And so to purchase from them, to honor their work, to give them money for their products, I think it's a good thing just for one's own community. First of all, almost always you end up with a better product. I mean, the distance between the field to the plate is shortened, and so you end up with a fresher product. Oftentimes when you deal with small farmers, you deal with more intentional growing practices. So there are a lot of kind of ancillary benefits that come out of that. I'm very careful not to make an idol. That is to say, not to worship at the feet of just local food in and of itself. I think it's a good thing, and I think there are good reasons for doing it, but I also don't want to be in a position where if you, for whatever reason, don't buy organic or you don't buy local, that you should feel guilty for that. So it's kind of a struggle for me, because we certainly do as much as we can at the restaurant, but I know a lot of times there are people just don't, as I was saying earlier, just don't have access to that kind of stuff. And so what happens when you don't have access to it? I think we should look at it as something that we ought to do, and when we can't, we know that there are reasons why we should be going for something better than this, but this is what we have. And frankly, if you're dealing with raw food, whole foods, and going from there and cooking, if you get it locally or you don't, I'm not overly concerned about that. It's not something that I would ever want to shame somebody for, and I know sometimes that happens, which is a bit of a bummer, at least from my perspective. But I think for us, one of the best things for us as a restaurant is the relationships that we have with the farmers that grow our food. It's a really cool thing to know that I know know the person that actually harvested a radish or a tomato or a peach that we might turn into a dessert or a salad or a side item for an entree. I mean, that's a pretty unique thing. It's part of the storytelling of food. So in the restaurant context, it's highly, we really value it. But again, I'm careful not to give it too much power, because I know that the reality is that not everybody has access or the funds, frankly, because it can be expensive sometimes to be able to do that. So it's sort of my middle of the road, I guess, approach to it. I'm John Perkins. I'm the executive chef and owner of Juniper Restaurant. We are at 360 North Boyle in the central west end of St. Louis. I always tell people I'm not a street name guy, I'm a landmark guy. So if you're familiar with St. Louis, we're a block east and a block north of Basilica, which is the big, gorgeous Catholic church down the central west end. So please come see us. We're open Monday through Saturday. We'd love to have you. So our website is junipereats.com. You can make reservations, see our menu, see a little bit more about us, and also contact us if you have questions.